the Shrink, and this is a sassy talk show where I talk sassy and you can talk sassy too, just by emailing me, and I'll respond to those emails. So today I'm going to talk about diagnosis and how therapists or shrinks diagnose people and how they come up with the ideas of these different diagnoses. Well, first of all, where we get the answers to try to figure out a diagnosis is from this book, which I don't know if you can read, the DSM-4. This is the little version, small version. There's a bigger version, more lengthy version. But that's kind of, it tells us the criteria to understand a diagnosis and the traits and the things that people have. And it has to meet a certain criterion. A certain number of these criteria have to be met in order for the diagnosis to be the actual diagnosis. And I'm sure you've heard of ADHD and bipolar and schizophrenia, and there's some unknown diagnosis. Autism is a diagnosis, Asperger's, and diagnoses like that. So what I wanted to tell you about the diagnosis is, first of all, don't make fun of the diagnosis. Don't be like, oh, you're so ADHD, and oh my God, you are so bipolar. Don't make fun of people and say those things, because, you know, people are those things and it makes them uncomfortable. So you might be talking to somebody who has it, or somebody in earshot may have one of those diagnoses, and that makes them feel bad. Number one thing to remember about diagnosis, they are mostly inherited. There are some other diagnoses that are created by the environment, but mostly the ones that everybody knows about are inherited, like your hair color, your eye color, or just like getting diabetes. It's an inherited thing, not something you should feel shame or embarrassment about because you didn't cause it, you didn't create it, and you didn't want it. So it's the same thing of making fun of somebody like, oh, you're so cancer. You know, there's cancer that's hereditary. So, you know, think about that. Just give that a thought or two. And so the most important thing to remember about diagnosis, a lot of the things in the book, all of us have those traits, certain traits. But it's the combination of traits that creates a certain issue when you're at school or at work and at home. So if it's something that affects you really to the point where you can't function as well at school or at home, then it creates a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is only just to help us figure out how to help you. And that's the number one goal of making a diagnosis, is trying to find the criteria to understand how best to make this person's life happier, more complete, and just more wonderful. And that's the goal of a diagnosis. So this is kind of a short one. I'm not really getting into the nitty-gritty of each diagnosis, but I will later. We'll talk about ADHD, we'll talk about bipolar, we'll talk about the different symptoms and the different medications, just a little bit about the medications, and we'll go from there. But remember, my favorite saying is, you are what you think. So stop the stinking thinking and start thinking good thoughts about yourself. All right, email me, marytheshrink@yahoo.com. Have a great day. Bye. Why I'm tearing out of